He called me worthless before the door swung open. Those words split the air like glass cracking. For 27 years, I believed anger could be managed, that love, once built, could be mended. But that morning, standing in our living room, I saw something shift in his eyes. My name is Margaret. I am 57, and for half my life, I built a home with Daniel. Husband, partner, mirror. I used to think he was my anchor. Now, as the morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles, I realized I was the only one holding us steady. The scent of cinnamon still lingered from the bread I baked before dawn. A small domestic ritual, kneading warmth into dough, waiting for laughter that no longer came. The smell mixed with fresh paint from the hallway Daniel had promised to finish last spring. It should have been comforting. Instead, it clung like guilt. "Worthless," he repeated, slower this time. "What did you say?" "You heard me." His tone cracked, almost trembling, but his eyes stayed dry. "After everything, why now?" He looked past me, toward the door. "Because she's here." I froze. A shadow moved across the frosted glass. The knock that followed was delicate, almost apologetic. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, young, composed, her perfume sharp and deliberate. She didn't speak at first. She didn't have to. The silence between us said everything. I watched Daniel's shoulders drop as if relief had arrived. I thought I'd feel rage, but it was something quieter, like breath leaving a wound. The air thickened, the smell of her perfume wrapped around me, blending with the cinnamon and paint, turning my home into something foreign. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. Instead, I whispered, "You brought her here?" He didn't answer. She stepped forward, extending a hand. "I didn't mean for this to happen." My laugh sounded strange, hollow. "People rarely do." She lowered her hand. Daniel turned away, muttering, "Don't start, Margaret. Not in front of her." My throat burned. "You already started." For a moment, no one moved. The mirror on the wall caught the three of us in fractured reflection. Husband, wife, lover, none of us recognizable. His wedding ring glinted against the light, and something inside me broke cleanly. I turned, picked up a crumpled letter from the counter. The handwriting was his, hurried, ashamed. I read the first line. "I can't keep pretending." The words blurred as my eyes filled. He reached out, maybe to stop me, maybe to justify himself. I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "You've said enough." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You called me worthless before she even walked in." The quiet that followed was unbearable. A house that once hummed with conversation now pulsed with absence. Later that evening, I sat at the dining table, the mirror still catching fragments of light. My hands shook as I wrote the date, March 8th, on a clean page. I needed a record, something more permanent than memory. That night, I found a folded note beneath the vase on his desk. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even meant to be found. It said, "I'll tell her soon. She deserves honesty." The paper smelled faintly of her perfume. The next morning, I took that note to our family counselor. She looked at it, then at me. "This is the first step," she said gently. "Keep it. It's your proof that you're not losing your mind." I nodded, tucking the note into a folder labeled Home Records. For the first time in months, I felt something close to control. Still, his words echoed through the house like a curse, worthless. But as I locked the folder away, I whispered back to the silence, "No, not anymore." His note smelled like her perfume. Every apology he made came rehearsed. The tone always the same, soft, steady, trembling, just enough to sound sincere. But I could hear it now, the pattern beneath the pause, the way guilt had rhythm. He called one evening while I was folding laundry. The sound of the dryer thumped behind me like a warning. "I just want to make things right," he said. His voice carried that practiced ache, the same one that used to melt me. I answered quietly, "You said that yesterday. I mean it this time." "You said that too." A silence followed, sharp and heavy. Then he sighed, a performance of regret. I looked at the closed door of my bedroom and thought about how many times I'd stood behind it, trying not to listen. His apologies used to be love letters with invisible ink, promises that vanished under heat. Now they were scripts. Later that night, I played one of his voicemails again. The sound filled the room, too close, too familiar. He spoke of forgiveness, of how we both made mistakes. But there was something in his phrasing that made me shiver. He was rewriting the story, turning me into the villain who drove him to cheat. My therapist had warned me about this. "Record what you remember," she said. "Write it down before his words replace your own." So I did. I kept a small notebook on the counter, filling it with facts, dates, phrases, moods, proof against the fog he kept blowing into my head. The next session, she leaned forward and said, "He's not apologizing. He's maintaining control." I nodded, gripping the pen tighter. "Then why do I still want to believe him?" "Because you were taught to equate suffering with love," she said gently. I went home and sat by the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, glowing against the dark. Inside, the candle on my desk flickered too, a soft mirror of my pulse. The flame trembled each time the wind brushed the glass. Then my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I pressed play, half hoping it would sound different. "Margaret," he said, voice breaking in all the right places. "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about how cold you've become. I'm still your husband." I closed my eyes. "You stopped being that the day you lied," I whispered to the empty room. The voicemail continued. He spoke about missing my laugh, about how we used to be a team. His tone carried a familiar warmth, manufactured empathy, designed to hook the part of me still searching for peace. But peace can't be built on manipulation. The sound of his voice filled the house, and for the first time, I turned the volume down instead of up. I wrote the date, April 2nd, beside a note. Played voicemail again. Detected identical phrasing from March 25th. It felt small, but it was evidence. The next morning, I brought that notebook to therapy. She read one entry and said, "You're not losing your mind, Margaret. You're documenting reality." I smiled faintly. Then maybe one day I'll read it without shaking. When I got home, I noticed something strange. Every time I tried to focus on silence, I could still hear his voice in the walls, echoes caught between the wood and my will to heal. So I lit another candle, let it burn beside the mirror. Its faint hiss became the only sound I trusted. As the wax melted, I realized the truth wasn't about believing or forgiving. It was about surviving his story without letting him narrate mine. The last voicemail I played that night ended with him whispering, "Please, just call me back." I didn't. Instead, I pressed delete and listened to the soft click of finality. That small sound, the end of a recording, felt cleaner than any apology. The recording didn't lie. He did. He counted affection like money owed. Every gesture came with interest. Every silence felt taxed. By the time I realized what he'd been doing, kindness itself had become a transaction. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the clock ticking too loudly above the doorway. The bills lay in a crooked pile, electricity, insurance, groceries, all past due. His checkbook was open, his pen neatly placed beside it, like a weapon laid down after use. That night, he came home late. I asked, "Did you move money again?" He didn't look up. "You wouldn't understand. I handle the same bills you do." He smirked. "Then maybe you should handle them better." He always made it sound like incompetence instead of control. I had been raised to trust, to let the man manage what he called the heavy lifting. But love, I learned, could be weaponized through withholding. The next morning, I went to the bank alone. The paper in my hand, the joint account ledger, felt rough beneath my fingers, the texture catching on my skin as though the truth itself resisted being touched. The clerk scanned the screen and frowned. "Ma'am," she said, softly. There were 4 recent withdrawals, $2,300, $1,700, $1,500, and $1,000. Total of $6,500, all signed by him. I swallowed. Can I get printed copies? Of course, she said, sliding the thin sheets across the counter. I stared at those numbers as if they were confession lines, the paper's edges pressed into my palms until my skin warmed. For years, I believed marriage meant shared ground, but now I stood in a fluorescent-lit office, realizing the floor had been slipping beneath me, one receipt at a time. When I came home, he was at the table, eating in silence. The clock struck noon. I placed the folder down beside his plate. You moved money without telling me. He didn't stop chewing. Our money. No, I said, steady this time. Your withdrawals. My ignorance. He set the fork down. You think this is about money? It's about honesty. Honesty doesn't pay bills. Neither does theft. His chair scraped the floor as he stood. You're making a scene. No, I whispered. I'm making a record. He left the room, muttering something about ungratefulness. The air he left behind felt stale, heavy. I looked at the clock again, its slow rhythm pulsing like the reminder of time wasted. Later, I called the bank manager back. I need to file a report, I said, under joint account review. He hesitated. Is there a reason? Yes, I replied, because trust doesn't balance anymore. Filing that fraud inquiry felt like breathing through broken glass, painful but necessary. The woman on the other end confirmed it. Reference ID 482A9, investigation opened. A simple code, yet it carried the weight of years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the table, running my fingers over the checkbook. The indentation of his handwriting felt like proof that control had always been the point. He had written my life in ledger lines and signatures. I thought about every gift he'd given me, the necklace on our anniversary, the coat last winter, and realized each one had been bought from the same account he now drained to keep me small. The kindness had never been free. It was collateral. Outside, the clock in the hallway ticked again, steady and cruel. Time was counting with him. But so was I. The stakes were clear now. This wasn't about the missing $6,500. It was about reclaiming the right to live without an allowance for dignity. I gathered the bank statements, placed them in a new folder labeled Personal Records, reference entry 482A9, and slid it into the drawer beside the counselor's note from last week. The sound of paper stacking over paper was the sound of me building a case. By morning, I had already made an appointment with a legal advisor. I didn't know yet how deep the lies went, but I knew where to start. On record, in writing, with numbers that couldn't be sweet-talked away. The account carried his secrets, not my name. She looked at me as if I'd finally seen it. Her eyes carried pity, but not surprise. That was the worst part. Realizing the truth had been visible to everyone but me. Ellen lived across the street, a kind woman in her 60s who baked on Sundays and watched everything from her front window. We used to share tea, trade recipes, gossip gently about neighbors. But that morning, she called me over with a look I'd never seen before. I think you should see this, she said, holding a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, grainy, but clear enough. His hand rested on another woman's waist, the same porch light behind them that he and I had painted together last spring. The glow softened their faces, almost tender. I traced the edges of the photo, my fingers trembling. The light made everything visible, even the lie I'd refused to see. Ellen hesitated. I didn't want to interfere. I nodded, staring at the image. When was this taken? 6 months ago, she said quietly. The night before your anniversary. I saw him drive her home. 6 months. The number sat heavy in my chest. That meant the affair started long before his first apology, before the fights about money, before the distance I'd mistaken for exhaustion. He wasn't just unfaithful, he was strategic. He used her, Ellen continued, voice softer now. I overheard him at the hardware store once, something about helping her with paperwork for her aunt's inheritance. I felt my stomach twist. That was his motive, her money. Not love, not escape, but gain. I remembered how he once told me, "People are investments. Some pay off." I thought he was joking. I pressed the photo to the table, light from Ellen's window cutting across it. The reflection landed on the scarf around my neck, the one he'd given me last winter. For a moment, it looked stained by that same light, carrying its own quiet accusation. "Do you want me to keep this?" Ellen asked. I shook my head. "No, I need it." "Be careful," she whispered. "He won't like that you know." She was right. When I confronted him that night, he laughed. "You're really taking gossip as evidence now?" "It's not gossip," I said, sliding the photo across the table. "It's proof." "Proof of what? A friendly moment?" "Under the same light we painted together?" He froze. The color drained from his face. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" "It does if someone's trying to destroy me." His voice rose, sharper now, full of cornered anger. I kept mine calm. "You did that yourself." He stepped closer, his tone shifting low. "Careful what you say. Words can sound like threats." "So can silence," I replied. He left the house soon after, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. I stood there staring through the window. Outside, the porch light flickered, then steadied, bright and unblinking. That evening, Ellen called to check in. "I'm fine," I told her. "No, you're not," she said, "but you will be." I hung up and called the police non-emergency line. The officer listened patiently as I explained that my husband had been volatile after a confrontation. "We can make a note," he said. "A reference entry, ID 71C4B, for your protection." When I ended the call, I sat by the window, scarf still around my shoulders. The fabric carried the faint scent of his cologne, that artificial comfort I'd once mistaken for love. I opened the photo again. Light filled the room, striking the image until his face almost disappeared. The stakes were no longer about a marriage. They were about safety, truth, and the right to my own reality. The clock ticked past midnight, and I realized I hadn't moved in hours. Outside, the wind pressed against the glass, rustling the leaves across the porch. The light above the door flickered once more, stubbornly refusing to die. It stayed on until morning. The light outside our porch burned all night. When truth travels by envelope, it weighs a ton. That morning, the letter sat on the desk between us, sealed but accusing. I'd been sorting bills when I noticed the company logo, his employer, not mine, and my name mistakenly printed beneath his. Habit made me open it. Conscience told me not to look further. But curiosity, that felt like survival. Inside was a human resources memo, stamped and signed. Words I shouldn't have seen stared back at me. Travel reimbursement, verified visit, Willow Lane, verified client signature. Willow Lane wasn't a client. It was her address. The paper was crisp, dry, the kind that resists bending. I ran my fingertips along the texture, feeling its quiet defiance. Each line pulled another layer of denial off me. The truth had always been there, folded neatly, waiting to be mailed. He came home an hour later, tossing his jacket onto the chair. "You opened my mail?" "It was addressed to me. By mistake." "So were your travel claims." He froze mid-step. The clock behind him ticked with mechanical indifference. "What are you talking about?" "The trip last month, the one you said was for work." He laughed once, low and dismissive. "You're imagining things again." I held up the letter. "Then tell me why this says you visited Willow Lane." He looked away. "You shouldn't have read that. You shouldn't have written it." The silence stretched. I realized how much space silence can occupy. It filled the room, pushed against the walls. Even the air felt crowded with what he wouldn't say. For years he'd controlled everything. The bills, the passwords, the schedule. I'd let him, because trust is easier than proof. But this was paper that couldn't lie. I placed the envelope on the desk and spoke carefully. "I'm removing my name from all shared accounts, effective today." His head snapped toward me. "You don't have the right." "I do now." He took a step closer. "You think cutting off money makes you strong?" I think not being dependent makes me free. Don't test me, Margaret. I already have. He leaned over the desk, lowering his voice to a threat. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said quietly, but not as much as you will. That was the moment the balance shifted. His authority cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but like wood splintering beneath pressure. Later that afternoon, I sat at my office desk, still shaking. I logged into the HR complaint portal and began typing. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling between fear and relief. Subject: misuse of corporate travel funds. Attachment: internal reference entry, ID 92F6H, memo received in error. I submitted it before I could talk myself out of it. My colleague, the HR liaison, called an hour later. We've received your submission, she said. This will trigger a disciplinary file. You did the right thing. I wanted to believe her, but right and safe rarely live in the same place. At home, he paced like a caged animal. You went behind my back. You walked ahead of me for years, I said. I'm just catching up. He slammed his hand on the desk, rattling the envelope still lying there. You're destroying everything. No, I whispered. You did that when you forged her address. He stopped. His jaw tightened. They'll believe me before they believe you. Then we'll both find out who the institution trusts more, the man with a memo or the woman who reported it. That night, I sat alone under the dim light of the desk lamp, the letter beside me. Its edges were already softening from how often I'd unfolded it, studied it, memorized it. It wasn't just paper anymore. It was armor. The stakes had changed. It wasn't about heartbreak now. It was about proof, about reclaiming the parts of myself hidden beneath his control. I knew he would retaliate, through charm, through anger, maybe through rumor, but I was no longer unprepared. Before bed, I placed the envelope in a folder labeled Workplace Evidence, reference entry 92F6H. The texture of it brushed against my skin again, faint and dry. Somehow, that friction steadied me. A week later, my HR contact called to confirm what I already knew. We verified the receipts, she said. They matched her address exactly. They said the receipts matched her address. His number lit up at dawn again. The sound cut through the quiet like a blade, slicing the calm I'd fought to rebuild. For 3 mornings straight, the same pattern. One missed call, then another within a minute. He knew I wouldn't answer, but that was the point, to remind me that silence wasn't safety. The phone glowed on the table beside a teacup, still warm from the kettle. I stared at both, unwilling to move. When I finally answered on the 4th ring, his tone was honeyed, almost tender. I just wanted to know if you're all right, he said. I'm fine, I replied. You sound tired. I slept well. You always lie when you're scared. The way he said it made my skin crawl. He wanted me to break, to react, to prove that the distance hadn't weakened his reach. I didn't give him that power. I ended the call, placed the phone face down, and took a sip of tea. The cup trembled slightly in my hand. The sound of ceramic against saucer felt louder than his voice, but the peace lasted less than a day. By the next morning, the calls started again, 6:02 a.m., 6:07, 6:10, each one from the same number, each one logged in my phone, neatly recorded, evidence disguised as harassment. I walked to the police station that afternoon, clutching a printout of my call log. The officer behind the desk, young, calm, patient, looked at me like he'd seen this pattern before. How many times has he called? 31 this month, I said. He nodded. That's enough to file for an access limit under harassment code. He filled out the form while I stood there, watching his pen move. When he asked if I wanted to block the number, I hesitated. If I block him, I said, he'll find another way. Then let us document everything first, he replied. By evening, the file existed, a reference record, entry ID 104B7, time-stamped and official. I left with a copy in my bag, but my hands still shook as I turned the key in my door. The phone rang again that night. This time I answered, more out of exhaustion than curiosity. "Why involve the police?" he asked. "They're there to protect people." "From what?" "From men who can't let go." He laughed quietly. "You think I'm dangerous?" "I think you're desperate." He went silent for a moment, then said, "You forget how much I know. Every routine, every friend, I still care." "That's not care," I said, voice steady now. "That's control." The line went dead, but the echo of his words stayed in the air. I stood in the kitchen, tea cold, phone still glowing. The clock read 9:47. I added the new entry to the police report, noting the exact minute. Documentation had become survival. The next morning, a knock rattled the door. 2 officers stood outside. "We received a welfare check request," one said. "Your husband reported you missing." I almost laughed. "He knows exactly where I am." They exchanged a glance, one writing in a small notebook. "We'll log it as a false claim. It's the 3rd this week." When they left, I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe through the rising panic. He was escalating, using concern as camouflage. The line between affection and threat had blurred long ago, but now it was institutional, official, traceable. That afternoon, I called the officer who'd helped me file the report. He answered immediately. "It's time to move for a restraining order," he said. "We'll attach all call records and welfare check reports. Reference file 104B7. I thanked him, but gratitude felt hollow. Justice always starts with paperwork and ends with fear. Still, fear was better than silence. It meant I was still here. That night, I turned my phone face down again, though I could feel it vibrating through the wood. I refused to pick it up. Instead, I poured another cup of tea, steadying my hand. Then one final vibration, a message. I told myself not to look, but I did. It was a voice note, only 3 seconds long. When I played it, his voice was calm, almost affectionate. "I'm still watching you." The sound lingered long after the message ended. The tea in my cup went cold. His absence filled the entire kitchen. The chair across from me sat untouched, the steam from my coffee drifting into the space where he once lingered, where arguments used to masquerade as breakfast. I thought silence might one day feel peaceful. It didn't. It just echoed. The envelope arrived mid-morning, thick, official, unshakably cold. A court summons. His petition to divide the assets before settlement. It was written in that sterile legal tone that drains the humanity from everything it touches. I read it twice before the meaning fully registered. He wasn't just leaving me. He was erasing me line by line. I traced the embossed header with my fingertip. The paper itself was cold, smooth, indifferent. It carried the chill of a courtroom I hadn't yet stepped into. When I reached the end, a small note stamped in blue ink caught my eye. Reference 3A72B. Court appearance scheduled. The formality of it all made me nauseous. A marriage reduced to a reference code. I called my legal advisor, the only person who'd stood steady since the beginning. "He's filed for asset division," I said. There was a pause. Then, "He's trying to push you into mediation first." "I won't do it." "You understand that will make him escalate?" "I'm done compromising with someone who treats truth like strategy." She sighed, the kind of sound people make when they respect your choice but fear its cost. "Then we'll proceed formally. I'll draft your expense declaration and supporting evidence." The next few days blurred into spreadsheets, receipts, statements, all the debris of a shared life now weaponized. Each total had a memory attached. $4,200 for house repairs that he'd claimed as business costs. $800 for a trip I never took but somehow paid for. Proof of fraud, yes, but also proof of how easily love can hide theft. By the time we submitted everything, I felt hollow. Yet somewhere beneath that exhaustion was something harder, colder, resolve. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and biting. I stood outside the courthouse, the air sharp against my skin. A light frost had gathered on the stone steps, melting slowly under the rising sun. My breath hung visible in front of me, and for the first time, I noticed how steady it had become. Inside, the room felt larger than necessary, its walls washed in pale beige and the scent of disinfectant. I sat on the wooden bench, the court notice folded neatly in my lap. Across the aisle, he stood with his lawyer, whispering as if this were a strategy meeting instead of the aftermath of a life. When the judge entered, the shuffle of movement brought a momentary hush. I didn't look at him at first. I focused on the document in my hand, on the way the paper absorbed the temperature of my palm, neither warm nor cold, just steady. Justice had its own climate, and I was learning to breathe in it. The proceedings began. His lawyer spoke first, polished and rehearsed. My client seeks a fair and expedient division of assets. The judge turned toward me. You've declined mediation? Yes, I said. My voice didn't tremble. And you've provided your financial documentation? I have. He tried to speak then, but I could tell the words didn't come easily. This isn't what I wanted, he muttered. Then why start it? I asked. His jaw tightened. Because you left me no choice. There were always choices, I said quietly. You just never chose truth. The clerk recorded every word, keys clicking in rhythm with my heartbeat. I wondered if anyone else could feel the temperature shift, how the air seemed to crystallize between us. My attorney leaned in. Stay still. Don't react. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the document as she summarized the case file. Expense ledgers, verified statements, and correspondence submitted under reference 3A72B. It was strange, hearing your pain cataloged like inventory, but also freeing. Evidence doesn't need emotion. It just exists. When the session ended, the judge dismissed us until the next date. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, and the room began to empty. I gathered my coat, my bag, the folded document that had started it all. As I turned to leave, I felt him glance at me. For a moment, I thought he might speak, might attempt one last manipulation disguised as apology. But he didn't. He simply looked away, eyes fixed on the floor, unable to meet mine. The stakes had shifted again. This was no longer a story about love or betrayal. It was about ownership of truth, of memory, of the future. Outside, the wind stung my face as I stepped back into daylight. The courthouse loomed behind me, a cold monument to accountability. I took one final breath, the air sharp and cleansing, and walked forward without looking back. He avoided my eyes in the courtroom. People believed him because he spoke first. His voice reached them through screens before I even knew I was on trial. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing endlessly, notifications stacked like verdicts waiting to be read. The town's forum had become a courtroom overnight. Someone posted a thread titled, "When Kindness Masks Chaos," and inside were lies so carefully written they almost sounded believable. He said I'd stolen money from our joint account after the separation. He said I had anger issues, that neighbors feared my temper. His words weren't proof, they were performance, but people rarely check the difference. I sat at the kitchen table, the screen's glow washing over my hands. The light felt wrong, cold, artificial, judgmental. It didn't just illuminate my face, it exposed me to the world. My heart pounded against the silence, heavy as a gavel. By noon, friends stopped replying. Even Ellen, who'd once sworn she believed me, sent a short message. Maybe it's better to stay quiet until this blows over. Silence disguised itself as support. I called my ally, someone from the local news circle, someone who still cared about facts. He's turning everyone against me, I said. She replied calmly, then let's turn the record toward truth. Send me everything, screenshots, messages, dates. It took 3 hours to gather it all. 37 screenshots, 2 witness statements, and 1 document showing the official account closure. Each file was an act of resistance, each pixel a protest. When I sent the folder, she responded, "We'll publish the correction through the verified portal. It may not erase the noise, but it will anchor the record. Still, I knew reputation doesn't heal with paperwork. It bleeds slow, invisible, through every conversation you're not invited to anymore. That night, I stepped outside for air. The streetlight hummed faintly, a halo over the empty road. I used to love the stillness of this hour, but now it felt like everyone's windows were eyes, glowing with quiet judgment. A message pinged again. You should stop pretending you're the victim. No name attached, just venom behind a fake account. I deleted it, but the echo stayed. When I met my ally the next morning, she handed me a printout. "We've filed the complaint," she said. "Reference entry 58 EC2J under the Digital Defamation Act. It's logged." I nodded, staring at the paper. Proof again, another artifact in this growing archive of pain. "Do you want me to issue a statement?" she asked. "No," I said softly. "Not yet." "You'll look guilty if you stay silent." "I already look guilty. Now I need to sound calm." She understood. Sometimes survival means waiting until the noise tires itself out. The following week, his story began to crumble. One of Tao, his so-called witnesses, retracted her post, admitting she'd been pressured to write it. Another screenshot surfaced, his own message bragging about how easy it was to make people pick sides. The forum moderators pinned an apology note, but it came too late. Once something burns through the public square, all that's left are ashes. People step around politely. I stood outside that evening, beneath the same streetlight, watching its glow tremble in the wind. I realized how much of this battle had been fought in silence. Not just mine, but the silence of those who knew better and said nothing. I thought of something my counselor once told me. Rumors are louder than truth because they don't need evidence, only echo. I promised myself then I would not disappear into that echo. I would rebuild, even if it meant starting where my name had been dragged. The stakes were no longer about what they believed. It was about who I would become after they finished talking. Later that night, my ally called again. "It's working," she said. "People are starting to question his version." "Good," I whispered. "Let them wonder. Let the silence shift sides." The screen on my desk dimmed as I turned off the notifications one by one. The light faded from blue to black, and for the first time in weeks, the room felt still, mine again. They saw the post before hearing my name. Numbers don't lie, but they can be weaponized. I used to believe balance sheets brought order, that they separated truth from chaos. But as I unfolded the letter from the bank that morning, the numbers staring back at me were warheads, precise, cold, and aimed at me. The statement bore my name alongside his, embossed in faint gray ink. My eyes caught on 4 checks, each one forged with my initials, each one withdrawn from an account I didn't even know existed. $2,400, $2,200, $2,600, $1,600. The total, $9,800, wasn't what broke me. It was the precision of the lie. He hadn't stolen in impulse. He'd planned it with the patience of an accountant and the cruelty of a lover who knew every line of my handwriting. The paper itself felt wrong, stiff, raised, embossed like polished glass. I rubbed my thumb across the edge, the texture catching my skin. Proof doesn't bleed, but it cuts. I called my lawyer, voice steady out of necessity. "He's opened a secondary account using your joint credentials," she said after scanning the documents. "That's identity fraud, plain and simple." "Can he get away with it?" "Not if we act now, but you'll need to sign an affidavit, notarized, every dollar, every date, exactly as shown." That evening, I sat at my desk, surrounded by evidence. The ledger, the lockbox, the quiet tick of the clock, all symbols of a home-turned courtroom. I signed the affidavit carefully, my pen gliding over each line like a blade through silk. The notary sealed it, stamping the reference code, entry 29D6F, into permanence. For the first time, the law had my back. Still, part of me hesitated. The paper trail was a mirror, reflecting the truth I didn't want to see. I had built my life with a man who believed deceit was just another investment strategy. The next morning, my lawyer met me at the district registry. The air was sharp with the smell of toner and cold metal filing cabinets. "Once we log this," she said, "it becomes public record. You're stepping into exposure." "I already am exposed," I said quietly. "This just makes it official." We submitted the affidavit to the clerk, who barely looked up as she stamped the page and slid it into a tray marked "Pending Investigation." The sound of that stamp was heavier than any verdict. It was bureaucracy's version of finality. When we walked outside, the world looked the same. But I wasn't. The stakes were no longer emotional. They were legal, measurable, traceable. My entire history had become a case file. That night, I unlocked the old wooden box where I kept my personal keepsakes, wedding photos, letters, small relics of what used to matter. I added the bank letter to it, sealing deceit among memory. As I closed the lid, I realized that love and evidence now shared the same space. My phone buzzed with a message from him. "You've made this uglier than it had to be." I typed back, "Truth always looks ugly when it's exposed." Then I deleted the thread, screenshotting it first, saving it for the record. Every word mattered now. My lawyer called late that evening. "The district registry confirmed receipt. The fraud case is formally opened." "What happens next?" "An inquiry. They'll trace his transactions, verify the signatures. You'll likely be summoned to testify." I paused. "And if they find him guilty?" She hesitated. "He'll face restitution, possibly charges. But remember, justice is slow. It counts in filings, not feelings." Her words stayed with me. Justice counts in filings, not feelings. Maybe that's why the numbers hurt so much. They were cold, unemotional, but absolute. I sat in the dim light of my study, running my fingers over the edge of the ledger once more. The embossed letters shimmered faintly under the lamp. Somewhere between each figure and signature, I saw the blueprint of every lie he'd built. I whispered to the empty room, "You weaponized numbers. I'll turn them into proof." Outside, rain began to fall, soft but relentless, each drop tapping against the lockbox by my window. It was strange comfort, the sound of persistence, of rhythm that couldn't be forged. When the storm quieted, I sealed the envelope addressed to my lawyer, finalizing the case file. The truth was now notarized, archived, and irreversible. I pressed my hand against the paper one last time before sliding it into the outgoing tray. The texture still felt like glass, clear, hard, and cold enough to reflect my resolve. His debt carried my name again. I spoke, and the room finally listened. For months, I had imagined this moment, my words landing in air that could not be twisted or denied. Yet standing there beneath the courthouse lights, I realized how heavy truth feels when it finally finds its shape. The microphone stood inches from my mouth, black and waiting. Its surface glimmered faintly under the white glare. I could hear my pulse in my ears, steady but insistent, a sound that felt like survival. The bailiff raised the worn Bible before me. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do." The words scraped against my throat, raw but certain. I began from the beginning, not the romantic version, not the story we'd once told friends, the real version. He controlled the accounts, the schedules, the conversations, every withdrawal, every phone call. It wasn't love, it was ownership. The stenographer's keys clicked in rhythm, building a record of my life in monochrome letters. Somewhere behind me, the hum of the crowd grew restless. They'd come for spectacle. But the silence that followed my words felt heavier than any noise. My lawyer gestured slightly, a reminder to breathe. "You have the floor," she whispered. I nodded. He forged my initials on 4 checks, totaling $9,800. When confronted, he called it a mistake, but I have the bank reference, entry 29D6F, and an affidavit filed with the district registry. This was not a mistake. It was a pattern. He shifted in his seat across the aisle. I could feel his stare, burning without contact. He told neighbors I was unstable, I continued. That's how abusers rewrite history, by publishing fiction before the truth has a chance to print. The prosecutor asked gently, "Why didn't you speak sooner?" I smiled faintly. Because I thought silence was safer than disbelief. But silence is its own kind of prison. Gasps broke through the benches. One woman dabbed at her eyes. The sound of sniffles echoed faintly, then fell still. My lawyer approached the bench with the document stack. Your Honor, exhibit submission, verified transcript page reference, 61D7F, protective order request, county court filing. The clerk accepted it with gloved precision. The faint shuffle of paper sounded like a verdict forming. The judge leaned forward. You're asking for a temporary injunction? Yes, Your Honor. For protection until the fraud and harassment cases conclude. He nodded slowly. Granted, pending review. That was it. 2 lines of speech, but they carried the weight of years. I exhaled. The sound trembled through the microphone, caught by its metal frame, and carried across the courtroom. It wasn't weakness. It was release. When cross-examination began, his attorney rose, slick voice rehearsed. Isn't it true? You exaggerated his threats? That you are emotionally biased? I met his gaze. I am emotionally human. There's a difference. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge lifted his gavel. Order. The questioning pressed on. Each time they tried to bend my words, I bent them back toward truth. He didn't yell, I said. He whispered. That's harder to prove, but easier to fear. The courtroom fell still again. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to hum quieter. Somewhere behind the benches, a reporter scribbled notes. I wondered what headline they'd craft, whether I'd be the villain, the victim, or simply a woman reclaiming oxygen. When my ally, the journalist who'd helped counter his rumors, was called to verify her statements, she spoke plainly. Everything she said aligns with our digital findings. Screenshots, timestamps, and verification IDs all match. We published corrections through official review. She never lied. It was strange, watching my truth defended by another's voice. It made the air feel lighter, like the sound itself had begun to carry some of my burden. After closing statements, the judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the transcript pages. The quiet stretched. I studied the wood grain of the bench before him, its worn lines like scars polished smooth by years of judgment. Then, with one firm strike of the gavel, the decision landed. Temporary injunction approved. Further hearings to follow. The sound split through the air like thunder wrapped in order. He flinched, just slightly. But I saw it. The tremor in his hand, the falter in his confidence. It was the first time the balance had shifted. The crowd stirred. Some faces turned toward me, not with pity this time, but something closer to recognition. The murmurs built, a slow swell of acknowledgement. I stepped back from the stand, fingers brushing the cool metal of the microphone one last time. It still vibrated faintly with my voice. Proof that I had spoken. Proof that silence had finally been broken. Outside the courtroom doors, sunlight hit the marble floor in pale streaks. The noise of the crowd faded behind me, replaced by the distant toll of a church bell somewhere in town. For the first time in years, that sound didn't signal loss. It marked return. He flinched when the gavel fell. Justice sounds different depending on who claps. The courthouse steps were flooded with light, too bright, too eager. Cameras flared like a firing line as I stepped outside, the air filled with questions instead of oxygen. Do you regret going public? Did you provoke him? Was this all about money? Each flash felt like an accusation disguised as curiosity. The noise was deafening, yet through it all I could hear one voice, steady, calm, and certain. My ally from the press, standing just beyond the barricade, notebook open, pen poised. Look this way, she said quietly. Don't answer theirs, answer mine. I turned toward her, the light cutting across her face, half shadow, half conviction. What do you want to know? The truth, she said simply. The microphone swarm closed in, but her question landed differently. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about record. And for the first time in days, I felt my heartbeat slow. "They've printed lies," I began. "They said I exaggerated, that I wanted attention. But all I ever wanted was acknowledgement. That what he did was wrong. That control disguised as care is still control." The crowd stirred. Someone shouted, "You could have kept this private!" I met his glare, the flash from his phone stinging my eyes. "Secrecy protects the guilty," I said. "Truth only feels violent to those who depend on silence." My ally scribbled every word, her pen scratching like a pulse against the page. That sound, small, rhythmic, became my anchor amid the noise. By afternoon, headlines bloomed across every screen. "Courtroom drama divides town." "Woman's claims questioned amid legal tensions." The same camera that caught my trembling hand framed him smiling as if vindicated. The lens doesn't care who bleeds, only who stands still long enough to be captured. But my ally refused to let that version win. She published my full statement, word for word. No spin. Her article bore the headline, "Truth under Oath. A Survivor Speaks." The printed copy arrived by evening, black ink still damp, the paper faintly smelling of metal and ink. I kept one folded inside my bag like a shield. The press room later that week was smaller, but the questions sharper. "You're not angry?" one reporter asked. "Angry?" I smiled faintly. "No, I'm consistent. Anger fades. Integrity doesn't." Some nodded. Others rolled their eyes, already typing new angles into their tablets. I realized then how justice fractures, not just in courts, but in conversations. When the official press release came from the district office confirming the injunction, I read it slowly. "Protective order upheld. Case under continued review. Reference entry 61D7F. Dry language, but it meant survival written into public record. I filed it myself into the evidence binder, placing it beside the article, proof of how perception and paper can finally meet. Later that night, I passed by the cafe where locals gathered to discuss the trial. Some looked up, others looked away. The air carried two versions of me. One whispered, one applauded. "Good for her," someone murmured. "She's making a scene," another hissed. I kept walking. Both sentences were true in their own way. My ally caught up with me near the corner. "You did well," she said. "You didn't let them twist it." "They'll twist it anyway," I replied. "Yes," she said, "but now they'll have to twist around your words, not his." That made me laugh. A small, quiet sound that broke through the tension like a thread of light through fog. Back home, I placed the newspaper on the kitchen table, beside the old ledger and lockbox that had started it all. The camera flashes were gone now, but the room still shimmered faintly with their ghost light. I traced the article's title with my fingertip and whispered, "This version stays." I thought about the ones who still doubted me, who'd chosen convenience over compassion. Then I remembered the faces of those who had clapped, not out of pity, but belief. Half the town wanted silence, half wanted spectacle. But somewhere in between, truth had found its sound. And maybe that's what justice really is. Not a gavel, not applause, but the steady echo that remains when the noise fades. Half applauded, half whispered. Every signature became a confession. The folder lay open on the table, neat columns, tight handwriting, and betrayal disguised as arithmetic. I had waited months for this moment, for the numbers to speak louder than his charm ever could. The accountant adjusted his glasses, his voice steady. We cross-checked every entry against travel and withdrawal records. The totals don't align. "How much?" I asked. He turned the page. $12,000, all routed through joint assets, documented under your shared signature. The word shared lodged like a thorn. For years, everything had been shared. House, name, accounts, silence. Now even deceit wore my initials. I ran my fingertips across the printed sheet. The paper was thick, almost glossy, each figure pressed deep into the grain. That texture, cold, indelible, felt like truth itself carved into permanence. The accountant handed me the audit summary, stamped with the case reference F2193. Proof had become tangible. He hesitated. "Would you like me to summarize this in plain language for court submission?" "No," I said quietly. "I'll read it myself. Every word deserves my eyes." I took the folder home, the evening light cutting across the living room floor like narrow stripes of interrogation. The pen he once used lay on the sideboard, blue ink still faintly visible on its tip. The same pen that had signed our mortgage, birthday cards, and now the ledger of his undoing. I read through the audit slowly, line by line. Each transaction mirrored a trip, each date overlapping perfectly with his supposed business travel. 5 hotel payments, 2 luxury store charges, an unexplained withdrawal of $4,000 marked consultation. Every lie quantified. The quiet in the house was absolute, broken only by the soft rustle of paper. It reminded me of those nights he'd return late, smelling of cologne and guilt, telling stories too rehearsed to be true. "You wouldn't understand," he'd say, half smiling. I understand now. When I reached the final page, I felt no rage, just clarity. Justice, when stripped of emotion, sounds like a steady pulse. My lawyer called later that night. "We've received the audit results. It's airtight," she said. "I've read them." "Then you know, this tips the scales entirely. The financial misconduct confirms everything. The court can now move for damages and restitution." I paused, the word restitution echoing like an aftershock. "Money won't fix what was broken," I said, "but truth will at least stop him from breaking more." She was silent for a moment. "You've carried this with grace. That's rare in cases like this." "Grace isn't forgiveness," I replied. "It's control." When we filed the audit officially the next morning, the clerk at the courthouse barely looked up. "Case reference?" she asked. "F2193, I said, handing her the folder. Her stamp hit the cover. Hard, final, absolute. Outside, the autumn wind cut through the plaza. I sat on a bench near the courthouse steps, watching leaves spiral like confetti from some invisible celebration. The pen rested in my palm, its weight familiar, almost intimate. It wasn't just a writing tool anymore. It was a relic of accountability. A memory surfaced, him once telling me, "Trust is just paperwork without witnesses." He had laughed when he said it. Now I realized how prophetic that laugh had been. Every page of this audit was a witness, signed and dated. Later that evening, my ally, the arbiter who had mediated earlier hearings, called. "You've done it," he said. "With the audit filed, the financial case closes. Next phase is restitution hearing." "Will he appear?" "He'll have to. His own signatures are the evidence." That night, I opened the folder again, just once more. I traced the last signature, his handwriting trembling slightly, perhaps rushed, perhaps guilty. Beneath it, the accountant's neat confirmation note. Irregularity confirmed by secondary verification. The edges of the paper brushed against my fingertips, smooth yet unyielding. Truth has that texture, cold, solid, and resistant to revision. I placed the pen beside the audit, aligning them perfectly on the desk. The balance felt symbolic, like scales finally leveled after years of tilt. No celebration followed, no triumph, just a quiet, measured peace, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that stays. When the courthouse lights dimmed across the street, their faint reflection caught the folder's glossy surface. For the first time, I didn't look away. I let the light linger there, illuminating every line, every digit, every proof that justice, slow, deliberate, undeniable, had arrived. Truth signed its own receipt. Freedom came printed on legal paper. It wasn't a shout or a victory march, just the quiet shuffle of documents across a wooden bench. The clerk's hand trembled slightly as she passed them. To me, the blue ribbon pressed tight against the seal. The ink still smelled faintly metallic, proof that something intangible, peace, had been made official. The decree granted me the house, sealed his accounts, and renewed the protective order. 3 pages that ended a decade of shadows. I ran my fingers across the embossed stamp. Its dry texture caught the light, like a scar that no longer hurt to touch. The judge's voice still echoed in my head. This court finds sufficient evidence of sustained fraud and coercive conduct. All contested assets revert to the petitioner. He said it plainly, without sentiment, yet the room seemed to exhale at once. My lawyer squeezed my hand, whispering, "It's over." But endings are never that simple. Freedom doesn't erupt, it unfolds. As I stepped outside the courthouse, the wind caught the edges of the decree, fluttering the pages like wings that didn't yet trust the air. The crowd outside had thinned since the hearing began, but a few lingered, faces I recognized from earlier trials, quiet supporters who nodded in solidarity. No cheers, no flashbulbs, just the sound of relief shared among strangers. My ally from Protective Services approached, her tone calm but warm. "We'll renew the security protocol for another year, just in case. You'll receive a certified notice by next week." I nodded. 1 year feels fair. "Fair isn't always what justice looks like," she said, glancing toward the courthouse doors. "Sometimes it's just the part that lets you sleep again." I smiled faintly. Then I'll take that kind of justice. At home, I unlocked the front door, the same door he'd slammed countless times, and stood in the hallway where the echoes once lived. The air felt different, still, grounded. The scent of the old wood, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the subtle hush of the house, waiting for its next beginning. The decree lay on the kitchen table beside the keys. I picked them up, their metal cool against my skin. For years I'd carried them like proof of belonging. Today, they meant ownership, no longer shared, no longer conditional. I walked room to room, tracing the edges of furniture I had once considered temporary. His photographs were gone. The silence he left behind had turned from threat to comfort. The clock on the mantel ticked evenly again, no longer a reminder of lateness or excuses. Time itself seemed to side with me now. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. "The division of property has been entered into the national record," she said. "He can't appeal without new evidence." "He won't find any," I replied. "I know. Still, it's good to hear you sound settled." "I'm not settled," I said after a pause. "Just free. There's a difference." She laughed softly. "Then maybe you've already won twice." That evening, I sat on the porch with the papers beside me, folded neatly under a glass weight. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in copper streaks. I thought about everything those pages held, numbers, clauses, verdicts, and how they all boiled down to one sentence. He no longer owns any part of me. For the first time, I didn't need to rehearse forgiveness. I didn't need to justify survival. Justice had done that for me. The night crept in quietly. I locked the door from the inside, slid the key into its familiar groove, and heard the latch click. Soft. Final. The sound wasn't fear anymore. It was certainty. I picked up the stamped decree once more. The texture under my fingertips felt lighter now, almost delicate. Paper shouldn't be able to carry this much weight, yet somehow it did. Freedom, I realized, doesn't shout or shine. It rests quietly on legal paper, signed by strangers, sealed in ink, and somehow it still feels sacred. The paper weighed lighter than his absence. Peace sounds almost suspicious at first. For so long, stillness had meant danger, a pause before shouting, a silence before breaking. Now it meant something else. The garden was quiet, except for the hum of bees drifting over the roses. Their scent, mixed with damp soil and morning air, steadied me better than any medication ever had. I kept a cup of tea beside me, steam rising in lazy curls. The cup had a small chip along the rim, a flaw I used to hide from guests. Now I traced it with my thumb like a scar I'd learned to live with. Maybe that's what peace was. Nothing perfect, just something you can hold without fear of it shattering. I'd been tending the roses for exactly 30 mornings now. I counted once, though numbers no longer ruled my life the way they did when every dollar, every minute, every bruise had to be measured to prove I wasn't imagining what he did. Out here, nothing needed proof. The journal on my lap was almost full. Its pages had carried everything: anger, disbelief, exhaustion, defiance. Lately, though, the words had changed. They'd grown quieter, less about him and more about how sunlight feels different when you stop waiting for footsteps behind you. My therapist once said, "You can't heal in the same language that hurt you." I hadn't understood that then. But as I read old entries, I saw it. How my tone softened without permission. How forgiveness slipped into sentences that began as accusations. The last appointment ended last week. She'd closed my recovery case file with a kind smile and said, "You've learned to live forward." I didn't cry. I just nodded. Healing doesn't come with applause. It comes with space. This morning, a letter arrived from the community center. They'd reopened the outreach program I once reported to when everything fell apart. The director wrote, "Your case inspired policy revisions. We don't lose track anymore." I read that line twice. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like completion. A second envelope came too. A shorter note from someone who'd once called me a liar. The handwriting was uneven. "I was wrong. I'm sorry," it said. No name, just initials. I folded it neatly and placed it between the pages of my journal. Not to keep as proof, just as evidence that change is possible, even when it comes late. Sometimes I still hear echoes of him in the small things, a song on the radio, the ring of a distant phone, but they no longer control the air in the room. I can breathe through them. The garden has become my witness now. Each rosebush holds a piece of what was taken and what was returned. The soil remembers everything, yet it doesn't judge. It only grows. My neighbor stopped by once, leaning over the fence. "You've turned this place around," she said. I smiled. It turned me around first. She nodded thoughtfully, her gaze lingering on the blooming vines. "It's good to see you out here." "It's good to be out here," I replied, surprised at how true it sounded. By evening, the light softened across the porch. The scent of roses drifted again, faint but grounding. I closed my journal, set it beside the chipped cup, and exhaled. For the first time in years, there was no story to defend, no version to rewrite. Silence used to frighten me. It was the pause between wounds. Now it's something else entirely. A companion, a boundary, a balm. The garden doesn't ask questions anymore. It just listens. And maybe that's all I ever needed. Something that doesn't demand my pain to prove my peace. As the day dimmed, I realized the strangest thing. I no longer feared quiet. I trusted it. The sound of stillness no longer meant waiting for the next storm. It meant the storm had already passed. I started to forgive silence itself. I wrote to him only to set myself free. It began on a quiet evening when the light from a single candle pooled across the desk. The flame flickered against the paper, steady but alive, like it understood restraint. I hadn't planned to write. It simply happened. My hand reached for the pen before my mind could protest. For years, words had been weapons or evidence. Tonight, they became surrender. I didn't start with "Dear." He didn't deserve the softness of greeting. Instead, I wrote what I could never say aloud. The room was still, the sound of ink scratching against paper almost rhythmic. The scent of wax lingered, faint, calming, sacred. It reminded me of vigils, of nights spent begging the dark to listen. "You took so much," I wrote. but not everything. I paused. The line looked smaller than it felt. My hand trembled slightly, yet I kept going. You left silence, and I learned to fill it. You left fear, and I learned to name it. You left blame, and I learned to release it. The candlelight flickered again, softening the edges of his memory until even his cruelty looked distant, almost unreal. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't for him. It was the final act of reclaiming myself. I kept writing. You once told me no one would believe me. You were right for a time. But truth doesn't need believers. It just needs time. And time, finally, believed me. A faint knock came from the hallway. My ally from counseling, the one assigned as my final witness for closure. "Are you ready to archive it?" she asked gently. "Almost," I said. She nodded. "No rush. Just make sure it says what you need it to say." I smiled faintly. It does. It says goodbye without asking for an answer. When she left, I looked at the page again. I'd written exactly 2 dates, his birthday and the day I left, both in black ink, both proof that life had marked itself around him, and now, away from him. The pen felt heavier as I signed my name, not the name he used to diminish me, but the one I'd chosen for my own records, the one that meant survival. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into a plain envelope, and pressed the seal shut. The wax seal cooled beneath my fingertips, hardening like resolve. For a moment, I considered mailing it. The address was still memorized, though I'd erased it from every document I owned. But sending it would have meant seeking acknowledgement. I didn't need that anymore. Instead, I took out a small box, a wooden one, carved with vines, and placed the sealed envelope inside. My counselor had arranged for private archiving at the recovery center. Each letter stored there, time-stamped and recorded, not for delivery, but for closure. Mine would join the others, testimonies that never demanded a reply. As I wrote the date on the catalog card, March 14th, 2025, I realized something profound. Every entry in that archive represented a choice not to retaliate, not to destroy, but to let go. The truest justice comes quietly. When I blew out the candle, smoke curled upward, carrying with it the faint scent of release. The light faded, but peace didn't. It stayed, hovering like a presence that didn't need proof. Later that night, I dreamed of a room full of unopened envelopes, each one glowing faintly, each one humming with unspoken forgiveness. No one read them, yet they filled the air with something almost holy. By morning I woke lighter. The ache in my chest had thinned into something gentler, like memory softened by time. I poured coffee, sat by the window, and watched the first hint of sunrise spill across the glass. I didn't need to reread the letter. I knew every word by heart. And though it would never reach him, it had already reached the only person who needed to hear it. Ink dried where pain once lived. He once said I was worthless. Now I define worth. The words echoed as I looked into the mirror. Same face, new meaning. Morning sunlight spilled across the glass, filling every crack and reflection that once seemed haunted. I watched the light linger, steady and patient, as if waiting for my permission to stay. It had been 3 months since the decree, 2 since I'd sent the unsent letter to the archive. Life had quieted into something almost unfamiliar, calm. Yet calm didn't mean silence anymore. It meant presence. That morning, I sat at my desk again, the same space where confession had once turned into closure. The screen blinked back at me, cursor waiting. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard before I typed the first sentence. He once said I was worthless. The words no longer burned. They built. I continued, each paragraph layering not bitterness, but truth. I wrote about the years of control disguised as love, the systems that failed to protect, the ones that eventually listened. I wrote about the courtroom and the roses, about forgiveness written but never mailed, and I wrote about the moment I stopped needing revenge because justice had already spoken. Midway through, sunlight shifted across the desk, catching the corner of the mirror opposite me. I saw my reflection framed by gold, softer than before, resolute still. That glow became my anchor. It wasn't vanity, it was survival made visible. When the article was finished, I titled it, "The Worth I Claimed." I uploaded it to a public forum known for survivor essays. The platform required verification for publication, proof of identity, confirmation of ownership. My ally from legal helped file the digital claim, ensuring my story couldn't be erased or altered. Minutes later, a notification appeared. Published, verified, author rights granted. I stared at the screen, not for pride, but disbelief. My name, my real name, stood beside the story, visible to anyone who'd ever doubted me. The first comment appeared within moments. "Your strength is contagious." Then another. "You just put words to what I lived." The same community that had once whispered, now listened. The same eyes that had looked away now sought understanding. It didn't feel like vindication. It felt like restoration. By evening, the story spread further than I expected. My inbox filled with messages, teachers, mothers, daughters, each one a reflection of the pain I thought had been mine alone. I replied to only a few, writing, "You're not alone anymore." Later I stepped outside. The sun was setting, the light folding into amber layers over the garden. My reflection in the window caught that same hue, the same woman, but lighter somehow, like forgiveness had replaced weight with air. I remembered his voice, sharp and dismissive. "You're worthless here." He'd said it once, not knowing that those words would become my beginning. I whispered into the fading light, "I am worth everything here." The line wasn't for him, it was for me, for the version that survived, for the one that stayed to rebuild. As dusk deepened, caught sight of the mirror through the window again. For the first time, the reflection didn't shift or flicker. The light stayed steady, constant. I understood then that worth isn't something given. It's something reclaimed, word by word, truth by truth. And when night finally fell, I didn't close the blinds. I let the last trace of sunlight linger on the glass, refusing to fade. The light stayed this time.